Helena shut the heavy wooden doors of the municipal library every night, like she was sealing away a part of herself no one else was allowed to see. The old brass lock clicked with finality, leaving her alone, with the smell of leather-bound volumes and the hush of decades. She ran her fingers along the spines, reading titles like Old Friends Who Asked Nothing in Return. Outside, the world judged her for grieving too long, for refusing to move on. Inside, there was order, rules, silence, a place where her pain could breathe without screaming. She liked the way the dust danced in the shafts of moonlight on marble floors. Sometimes she spoke aloud, just to hear her own voice, fragile and determined. The echo made her feel less dead. It was her domain, this relic of another era. She'd chosen to survive here, among ghosts of stories. The night was cold enough to make the glass tremble when the rain hit it, long streaks like fingers clawing for shelter. Helena sighed as thunder rolled above the city like a threat. But she didn't jump. Storms were honest, she thought. They didn't hide their fury. She stacked returned books with meticulous precision, checking dates, reshelving by call number. It was her ritual, the way she kept the past at bay. Outside, streetlights blinked in the downpour, and cars hissed through puddles, but no one would dare enter at this hour. No one ever did. She liked that. This was her time to be untouchable. She wiped her brow with the back of her hand and muttered, "Almost done." Even her own voice sounded tired. She didn't want to go home to the quiet that hurt. The bell above the door clanged with a violence that made her heart stutter. She spun around, eyebrows drawn, glaring at the intruder who had broken the spell. He stumbled in, soaked to the bone, water dripping from his hair onto the wooden floor. His coat clung to him like a second skin. His boots left muddy prints. Helena felt her lip curl in irritation before she could stop it. "We're closed," she snapped, voice sharp enough to cut. He looked at her, blinking rain from long lashes, eyes bloodshot with exhaustion. He didn't apologize. Instead, he shivered, teeth chattering, clutching a ruined notebook against his chest like a lifeline. Lightning illuminated the hollow of his cheeks. He looked lost. For a heartbeat, she softened, but only for a heartbeat. "I just need to stay here until the rain stops," he mumbled, voice cracked like old paper. She folded her arms, glaring at him over the counter. "That could take all night," she warned, as if hoping he'd get the hint and leave. He didn't even blink. He sank to his knees, dripping onto the carpet, and pressed the notebook to his forehead. Helena watched with a mix of annoyance and alarm. Who begs for shelter in a library? She chewed her lip. She hated this, being forced to care, being dragged back into a world of needs. He looked up at her then, dark eyes pleading without words. She sighed, a sound like defeat. "Fine," she spat, "but don't touch anything." He didn't thank her, just nodded, shivering. She turned away to hide her frustration, wiping her damp palms on her skirt. She told herself it was just one night, just one lost man who would be gone by morning. But she felt her heart hammering too hard in her ribs. She wasn't used to having anyone here after hours. Not since... No, she wouldn't think about that. She forced herself to focus on the ledger in front of her, though the letters blurred. She could hear him breathing raggedly, trying to control it. The silence between them was like a loaded gun. She cleared her throat and said, without looking up, "There's a bathroom in the back, towels in the closet. Don't make a mess." She wasn't sure why she offered. Maybe it was the storm, maybe it was him. He disappeared into the dark hall without a word, and she sagged against the desk, letting out a breath she didn't know she was holding. Rain lashed the windows so hard it sounded like they'd shatter. She closed her eyes, listening to the thunder, willing herself to feel nothing. This wasn't her problem. She'd made a promise to herself years ago to stop letting other people's tragedies infect her. She heard the faucet run, the squeak of old pipes. When he returned, hair slicked back, skin flushed from scrubbing away the cold. He looked a little more human. But those eyes, tired, haunted, never changed. She didn't ask his name. She didn't want to know. That was how you got hurt. He settled onto one of the reading chairs, tucking his knees up, clutching that notebook like a relic. She noticed the cover was torn, pages warped beyond repair. Ink bled into meaningless smudges. He traced them with his finger, eyes dark with something heavy. Helena forced herself to look away. She picked up a book and pretended to read, but the words didn't make sense. The silence thickened around them, full of things unsaid. The clock on the wall ticked, far too loud. He coughed softly, clearing his throat, but didn't speak. She wanted to tell him to leave, but the words died. The storm outside raged on. There was nowhere for either of them to go. Thud. She cursed under her breath and glared at him. He didn't. Finally, he broke the silence. "Do you read poetry?" The question startled her so much she dropped her book with a loud thud. She cursed under her breath and glared at him. He didn't flinch. He just watched her, unblinking. "I used to," she said stiffly, picking it up. He nodded like that was enough of an answer. She noticed how his fingers trembled, how he pulled the frayed cuffs of his coat over them to hide it. She hated that she noticed. "Why?" she asked finally, voice low. He looked down at his ruined notebook. "I used to write it." The words were soft, like confession. She bit her lip to stop from asking more. They sat in that suffocating quiet for what felt like hours, rain a steady drumbeat on the roof. He didn't try to talk again. Instead, he leaned back, eyes closed, breathing slow and uneven, as if even existing hurt. She wondered what he was running from. She told herself she didn't care, but she did. God, she did. She watched the way his jaw tensed, the way he winced when thunder cracked. Broken things recognized each other. She set her book down and rubbed her temple. The question she didn't want to ask burned in her throat. Finally, she let it out like poison. "Why here?" His eyelids fluttered open. He swallowed hard. It felt safe. Her chest tightened painfully. She scoffed, shaking her head. "Safe? In a library?" He gave her a humorless smile. "Books don't lie to you." She opened her mouth to argue but found she couldn't. He had a point. She leaned back in her chair, arms crossed, refusing to let him see how that hit home. The truth was, she'd been hiding here for years for the same reason. The world outside was too loud, too cruel, too demanding. Here, the worst thing that could happen was a paper cut. He watched her carefully like he could see through every wall she'd built. She hated it. She hated him for making her feel anything. And yet, she didn't tell him to leave. The lightning flared so bright it lit the whole room, casting grotesque shadows on the walls of overstuffed shelves. Helena jumped this time. He noticed but didn't comment. Instead, he hunched forward, elbows on knees, staring at the floor. Water dripped from his hair, pooling under the chair. She wanted to scold him about the carpet but stopped herself. It felt wrong to fight over something so small when there was so much else between them. He sniffed, wiped his nose on his sleeve. She cringed but didn't say anything. She heard herself ask, "Are you hungry?" The question slipped out before she could stop it. He nodded slowly. Starving. Her heart cracked a little more. She stalked into the break room, rummaging for old packets of crackers and instant coffee. Her hands trembled as she poured water into the kettle. Why was she doing this? She wasn't supposed to care. She'd sworn she'd never do this again. But the image of him shivering, eyes hollow, wouldn't leave her. She cursed under her breath, blinking back. He appeared in the doorway, silent as a ghost. She didn't hear him come in. He glanced at the mess, but didn't comment. She straightened, brushing hair from her face, cheeks burning. "It's fine," she snapped before he could speak. He didn't flinch, didn't move, just watched her with those dark, unreadable eyes. Finally, he took a careful step forward, bending to pick up the shards. She moved to stop him, but he held up a hand. "Let me." His voice was steady, but the way his fingers shook betrayed him. She bit the inside of her cheek to stop from screaming at him to leave. He wasn't supposed to be kind. That wasn't fair. They cleaned in silence, the only sound the rain and the soft scrape of ceramic against the trash bin. When it was done, she handed him a towel, trying not to touch his fingers. He wiped his hands, then his face, dragging the cloth over days-old stubble. She looked away, pretending to be busy rinsing the sink. He lingered, watching her back. "Thank you," he said finally, voice raw. She didn't answer, didn't dare. Instead, she busied herself with the crackers, pushing the pack into his chest when he got too close. He took it without complaint. Crumbs fell onto the floor as he ripped it open like he hadn't eaten in days. Maybe he hadn't. She leaned against the counter, arms folded, watching him devour the stale crackers like they were a feast. His eyes fluttered shut with relief. She felt something twist in her gut. She shouldn't care. This wasn't her responsibility, but she remembered what hunger felt like. not for food, but for something that filled the hollow ache inside. He chewed slowly, crumbs clinging to his chapped lips. When he was done, he crumpled the wrapper in one hand, not meeting her gaze. She cleared her throat. "You can stay, but just tonight." Her voice trembled despite her best efforts. He nodded without arguing. She hated that she felt relief. He appeared in the doorway, silent as a ghost. She didn't hear him come in. He glanced at the mess, but didn't comment. She straightened, brushing hair from her face, cheeks burning. "It's fine," she snapped before he could speak. He didn't flinch, didn't move, just watched her with those dark, unreadable eyes. Finally, he took a careful step forward, bending to pick up the shards. She moved to stop him, but he held up a hand. "Let me." His voice was steady, but the way his fingers shook betrayed him. She bit the inside of her cheek to stop from screaming at him to leave. He wasn't supposed to be kind. That wasn't fair. They cleaned in silence, the only sound the rain and the soft scrape of ceramic against the trash bin. When it was done, she handed him a towel, trying not to touch his fingers. He wiped his hands, then his face, dragging the cloth over days-old stubble. She looked away, pretending to be busy rinsing the sink. He lingered, watching her back. "Thank you," he said finally, voice raw. She didn't answer, didn't dare. Instead, she busied herself with the crackers, pushing the pack into his chest when he got too close. He took it without complaint. Crumbs fell onto the floor as he ripped it open like he hadn't eaten in days. Maybe he hadn't. She leaned against the counter, arms folded, watching him devour the stale crackers like they were a feast. His eyes fluttered shut with relief. She felt something twist in her gut. She shouldn't care. This wasn't her responsibility, but she remembered what hunger felt like, not for food, but for something that filled the hollow ache inside. He chewed slowly, crumbs clinging to his chapped lips. When he was done, he crumpled the wrapper in one hand, not meeting her gaze. She cleared her throat. "You can stay, but just tonight." Her voice trembled despite her best efforts. He nodded without arguing. She hated that she felt relief. Miguel couldn't leave. The first morning after deciding to stay, he showed up at the library, unshaven, bleary-eyed, clutching a cheap notebook like it was a life raft. Helena pretended not to notice the way his fingers trembled. He sat at her usual table, spreading out papers, asking in a hush if he could stay until closing. She frowned, heart pounding, told him he had to be quiet. He just grinned. It was disarming. By noon, she was perched across from him, red pen in hand correcting a sentence. He let her. She hated herself for wanting to. He rented a tiny attic room above the bar down the street. Helena heard the gossip before he told her. "They say you're paying rent with poems," she teased one afternoon. Eyes narrowed over the rim of her tea. He didn't deny it, just shrugged and said, "Words are all I've got." She wanted to scoff, but something in his voice cracked her. He kept coming back, day after day, as if the library were his confessional. She didn't ask questions she wasn't ready to answer herself, and he didn't press, for a while. They spent hours in hushed debates over tragic endings, the smell of old paper between them like incense. He read aloud with a husky voice that made her shiver. She corrected him, rolling her eyes, but couldn't hide her smile. When the bell chimed for closing, they lingered in the doorway, not quite saying goodbye. He'd walk her home sometimes, boots scuffing wet pavement, hands stuffed in his coat. She never invited him in. He never asked. Yet their silences brimmed with things unsaid. Regret, hunger, hope. Helena tried to keep her guard up. She arranged the front desk like a fortress of stacked returns. She spoke in curt sentences, cataloged her feelings the way she did the archives. But then he'd say something reckless and honest, and she'd crack. One night he whispered that she was the bravest woman he knew, and she nearly told him everything about the blood, the funeral, the months of waking to an empty bed. Instead, she told him to shut up, voice shaking, and he only smiled, eyes dark and kind. The town noticed. The mayor's wife returned a romance novel and asked, too sweetly, "So, your new volunteer is a drifter?" Helena lied without blinking, said he was doing research. Miguel laughed when she told him, "Researching what, your heart?" She slapped his arm, cheeks burning, but didn't deny it. He winked, and for a moment the air felt brighter. But every time they drew close, something pulled them apart. The past, the fear, the sense that neither of them deserved another chance. One evening, as wind howled outside and rattled the old windows, their conversation turned sharp. Miguel accused her of hiding. "You haunt this place like a ghost," he said, voice low, eyes bright with challenge. She snapped back that he didn't know anything about her loss, that he was just a coward running from his own. His mouth tightened. For a heartbeat, neither spoke. Then he said, softer, "You think you're the only one who's lost everything?" She blinked, breath catching, but she didn't answer. After that fight, he didn't come back for days. Helena pretended not to notice at first. She rearranged shelves with ruthless precision, barking orders at the teenage Paige. She closed early one night just to stand in the dark, back pressed to the door, heart racing with anger she couldn't name. She told herself it was better this way, safer, cleaner, but the quiet grew oppressive. She found herself glancing at the door every time it creaked, stomach twisting with disappointment. At home, Helena sat at her kitchen table with pen and paper, writing letters she'd never send. Pages filled with confessions. How it felt to laugh again, how scared she was of letting him in, how guilty she felt every time she thought about kissing him. She tore them up and burned them in the sink, but the words stayed lodged in her chest. Sleep eluded her. Even in dreams, she heard the echo of his voice calling her out, telling her she was alive, even if she didn't want to be. Meanwhile, Miguel wandered. He sat in the back of bars, pens scratching on napkins, writing lines that didn't rhyme, didn't make sense. All of them about her. About the way she tucked her hair behind her ear when reading, the way her eyes flared when she was angry. He tried to drink enough to forget, but only got sloppy and sad. He told a bartender he was cursed, that he loved someone who was married to grief. The bartender just poured another round. He almost left town. He packed his bag one dawn, coat heavy with rain, heart sick with self-loathing. At the edge of the bus station, he stopped. He thought of her behind that desk, lips pressed tight to keep from shaking. He turned back. He didn't even know why, except that leaving felt like dying all over again. He walked the streets until his feet blistered, rehearsing what he'd say, but words failed him. All he wanted was to see her face again. Helena told herself she didn't care. She dusted every shelf twice, scolded a child for giggling too loud. She stared at the clock, willing it to move. She hated the way the place felt empty, without him sprawling in the reading nook, muttering edits to himself. She tried to read her favorite novel, but the words blurred. She closed it with a thud that echoed through the empty aisles, realizing she'd fallen in love with a man who didn't know how to stay. Days later, he returned. Not triumphantly, but in tatters. His coat was ripped, eyes wild with exhaustion. He didn't say hello, just stood there in the doorway until she noticed him, breath catching in her throat. He looked like hell, like regret personified. She wanted to scream at him, ask where he'd been, but she just stood, lips parted, waiting. Finally, he spoke. "I couldn't do it. I couldn't leave." His voice cracked. It broke something in her. He didn't approach, didn't dare. His fingers curled around the strap of his bag, like it was the only thing keeping him upright. His eyes darted everywhere but her. She swallowed hard, pulse roaring in her ears. When she finally found her voice, it was ragged. "Why come back?" He exhaled, shaking his head. "Because it's you," he whispered, so quiet she wasn't sure she heard it right. Her vision blurred with tears she refused to shed. Miguel dropped to his knees right there among the encyclopedias, his bag falling to the floor with a dull thud. "I'm so fucking tired of running," he gasped, voice breaking. He looked up at her, eyes raw and wet. "Please, even if you can't love me, even if you hate me, just let me stay." The silence in the library was suffocating, pressing in on both of them. Helena felt her heart trying to claw its way out of her chest. She wanted to say yes, God she wanted to, but the ghost of her husband sat between them, grim and accusing. She pressed her knuckles to her mouth, shaking her head, unable to breathe. Memories flooded her, the wedding, the laughter. The last time she saw his face, she felt traitorous for even imagining letting Miguel in. "I don't know if I can do this," she choked. "I don't know if I can love anyone ever again." Her voice was shredded. Miguel didn't flinch. He didn't plead. He just watched her, breathing hard, tears still wet on his face. "Then don't promise me anything," he said hoarsely. "Don't lie. Don't even try. Just let me be here. Let me see you. Let me prove I can stay." It was the closest thing to a vow he'd ever spoken, and it wasn't even for her, it was for himself. She heard it in every syllable, the desperation, the hope, the truth. Helena turned away, spine rigid, fists clenched at her sides. She wanted to tell him to go to hell, wanted to scream that he was selfish, that he didn't understand what he was asking of her. But all that came out was a sob. She bit it back so hard she tasted blood. The library seemed to groan around them, ancient beams settling with the weight of their grief. She felt him behind her, but he didn't touch her. He knew better. For a long time they just breathed together, ragged and uneven. Dust motes floated in the pale lamplight like ghosts eavesdropping. Helena wiped her eyes with the heel of her hand, cursing under her breath. When she finally turned around, he was still on his knees. He didn't look away. She studied his ruined expression, the raw sincerity. She hated him for it. Hated herself more for believing him. Her heart squeezed so tight it hurt to inhale. She finally spoke, voice low and wrecked. "If you're gonna stay, you're gonna have to fight for me. I'm not making this easy. I can't." He nodded once, slowly, as if memorizing every word. His breath shook, but he didn't cry again. "I wouldn't want it easy," he rasped. She watched him gather himself, pick up his bag with shaking hands. He didn't ask if she wanted him there. He didn't need to. He just stood, taller somehow, and waited for her permission. Helena didn't give it outright. She didn't offer a smile or a promise. She just stepped aside, giving him space to move past her deeper into the stacks. He hesitated, then brushed by, careful not to touch her. The sound of his footsteps faded among the shelves. She pressed her back to the wall, breathing like she'd run a marathon. The air felt sharp in her lungs. She didn't know what they were now. She only knew she wasn't ready to let him go. The night the fire started, no one saw it coming. Miguel was reshelving old newspapers in the basement archives, cursing under his breath at the crumbling stacks. Upstairs, Helena sat at the desk, rubbing her temples, fighting a headache that felt like a warning. Outside, thunder growled over the hills, wind snapping the shutters like angry teeth. Neither of them noticed the spark in the ancient wiring. Neither smelled the faint whiff of burning until it was too late. The past is like that, smoldering for years before it roars to life. Miguel was the first to see the smoke seeping from the stairwell. He dropped the stack of yellowed headlines, paper fluttering like dead birds. "Helena!" he shouted, voice cracking with panic. She didn't answer right away, blinking at the haze that curled around her feet. The fire brigade arrived late, their hoses sputtering under the downpour. Water soaked the crowd, steam hissing as it met the flames. Helena barely registered the shouts, the commands, the futile spray of water. She felt like she was watching herself from a distance, numb and hollow. Miguel kept murmuring her name like a prayer, voice cracking with fear he didn't try to hide. She didn't answer him. She didn't have any words left. At some point, the mayor's wife pressed a blanket around Helena's shoulders. She didn't thank her. She just sat there shivering, eyes locked on the ruins. Miguel finally snapped at the woman to give them space. When she protested, he bared his teeth, voice low and shaking. "She just lost everything. Let her fucking breathe." The woman scuttled away. Miguel crouched lower, close but not touching, waiting for her to see him. Helena's breath rattled in her chest. Smoke clung to her hair, her clothes, her very skin. She pressed her forehead to her knees, trying to block out the world. The roar of the fire was dying, leaving only the crackle of collapsing beams. She could hear children crying, adults murmuring about insurance, about blame. Miguel was silent now. He'd given up words. He just watched her break. When she finally raised her head, her eyes were swollen and red. She caught his gaze, and something in her cracked open wider. "Why?" she rasped, voice a threadbare whisper. "Why does everything I love have to burn?" He didn't have an answer. He looked stricken, mouth working soundlessly. Finally, he reached for her hand. She didn't stop him. His fingers were rough and shaking, but warm, alive. She squeezed his hand so hard it hurt. He didn't let go. Around them, the town bustled in grim panic, buckets passing hand to hand, even though it was pointless. But for that moment, there was only them. The heat of the fire, the cold of the rain, the unbearable silence between heartbeats. He leaned closer, voice wrecked. "I'm not leaving you, even if you want me to." She shuddered, closing her eyes. They didn't speak much after that. He helped her up, arm looped tight around her waist. She didn't protest. Her legs barely worked, knees buckling on the slick cobblestones. He half carried her through the watching crowd, ignoring the whispered pity, the sidelong glances. At her door, she paused, staring at the handle as if it were a lock she'd forgotten how to open. Miguel waited. When she couldn't move, he reached around her and turned it himself. Inside, everything felt too quiet. The world outside raged with thunder, but in her little kitchen, there was only the ticking of a clock. Helena slumped into a chair, dropping the blanket. Ash streaked her face. She didn't bother to wipe it away. Miguel stood in the doorway, dripping rain, fists clenching and unclenching at his sides. He didn't know where to put himself, didn't know if he was allowed to sit. Finally, he moved. He dragged a chair across from her, sat down heavily, elbows on his knees. "Say something," he pleaded. She blinked at him, eyes hollow. Her mouth twitched, but no sound came. His jaw tightened. "Scream at me, hit me. Tell me I was right to drag you out. Tell me you hate me." She shook her head once, slow and solemn. A tear slipped free and she didn't wipe it away. Miguel swore, voice cracking. He scraped a hand through his hair, leaving it in wild disarray. He looked at her like she was a puzzle missing half its pieces. "I don't know how to help you," he admitted, voice dropping to a near whisper. She stared at her ruined palms, smoke-stained and trembling. "You can't," she said flatly. "No one can." The clock ticked on, cruel in its normalcy. He let out a wet laugh that sounded like a sob. He leaned forward, eyes glinting with desperation. "Then let me stay anyway." She finally looked at him properly, really saw the terror and devotion warring in his expression. She felt her heart lurch painfully in her chest. "Why?" she demanded, voice breaking. He exhaled shakily. "Because if I leave now, I'll never come back. And I don't think you want to be alone tonight." He said it like a dare, voice so gentle it cut her. She didn't answer. She couldn't. Her breath hitched, throat raw from smoke and crying. He didn't wait for permission this time. He stood, walked around the table, and knelt in front of her, resting his forehead lightly against her knee. She jolted, but didn't push him away. His voice was muffled when he spoke. "I'm sorry. For everything. For not saving more. For not knowing how to fix you." She let out a strangled laugh that wasn't funny. For a long time, they stayed like that. Two broken people in a ruined town, thunder rumbling like a warning. She hesitated, then threaded shaking fingers through his hair. He shuddered at the contact but didn't move. She felt his tears soaking her skirt, hot and shameful. Her own followed, silent and relentless. Outside, the fire was dying. Rain hammered the roof like absolution that would never come. Eventually, she tugged him up, her grip weak but determined. He settled beside her, arms wrapping around her in a hesitant embrace. She buried her face in his shoulder, breathing him in. Smoke, sweat, rain, fear. He tightened his hold like he was afraid she'd vanish. Neither said the words they both wanted to. "I love you" was too fragile. "I need you" was too dangerous. But they held on. And for now, that was enough. Outside, dawn threatened, pale light creeping through soot-streaked windows. The town would wake to ashes, accusations, insurance claims, but in that tiny kitchen, they stayed locked together, breathing each other's grief. Helena felt her heart beat against his, ragged but real. Miguel rested his cheek against her hair, eyes open, haunted. Neither knew what would come next, but for the first time, they weren't alone in the ruins.